Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you again, as in 2008, however in a virtual form. Just to look back to 2008, I'd like to remind you about a few things that I underlined as fundamental then. First of all, we have had 25 years of unprecedented economic growth. We have had a golden age for the global economy because we have increased economic freedom between countries, and we call that globalization. We've also increased economic freedom within countries, with a few exceptions such as Cuba and Iran and Sudan and North Korea. But most other countries have increased economic freedom, and therefore they have had a very, very good economic growth, and we have also cut the extreme poverty rates of the world sharply. But in 2008 we had started to experience the financial crisis, and that was a very turbulent time, of course, and it was a time when we had the first wave of the financial crisis, which took on the financial sector, the banks, which was the main problem back then. And if we look back at the causes, the main causes of a financial crisis, we have the global imbalances, of course, with the deficits in the US and the surpluses in China. But we've also seen that some main causes of the financial crisis were the government interventions in the United States housing markets with subsidies and government-owned enterprises, etc. And also the United States monetary policy, which kept interest rates low for too long and therefore fueled the housing bubble. And so the bad debt spread over the world, and many, many other parts of the global financial system was in trouble. The problem is now that we have now the second wave of the financial crisis, which is not in the financial sector mainly, but it's in the real economy of so many countries. And that is, to a large extent, actually caused by the politics that were launched, the policies that were launched to solve the first wave of the crisis. As you remember, there were many stimulus programs. Governments spent taxpayers' money, and they intended to stimulate the economy so that the crisis would be smaller and the economic upturn would come sooner. The problem was that it caused huge deficits, increased the economic and the public debt enormously. Problems with that was that the second wave of the financial crisis is a debt crisis. So many countries throughout Europe, but also outside Europe, United States for instance, have too big deficits, too big public debt. And that creates the second wave of the crisis, because the actors in the financial markets that lend the money, they wonder, will we ever get the money back? And so there is a hike in interest rates, and the countries are unable to pay, such as in the case of Greece. We have many countries in great crisis, but Estonia has managed very well, thanks to its policies of budgetary balance and also structural reform for economic freedom. My home country, Sweden, has also managed very well, thanks to the same things, budgetary balance and structural reform for economic freedom. I think those two policies that we have learned in Estonia and in Sweden, which have meant that we are two of the European countries that have managed the crisis in the best way. That's still the lesson to be learned for many other countries. And that takes a lot of political will, political courage, determination. Estonian politicians and Swedish politicians and politicians in many other countries as well, but not in enough number of countries, have had that courage and that insight into what kind of reforms that are needed, and that now has to be exported to other countries. Sometimes a crisis leads to an insight that you have to reform, and we certainly do have a crisis right now. So don't waste this moment. Don't waste the crisis, because a crisis might lead to something better. And now the debt crisis is haunting Europe, and we need no more stimulus packages, because the stimulus packages contributed to bringing us here. We have to have cuts in deficits, and we have to have growth reforms. Sometimes it's said that if you cut the deficits too fast, then you will have a worse crisis. But as a matter of fact, new research shows that many countries have been able to bounce back with high growth rates quite quickly after cutting public expenditure and cutting public deficits. So that is the advice that we can export to other countries. Cut the deficits, and cut the public debt, and you will be back on a sound basis. Now, it's not only Greece that's in problems, we also have the kind of problems in Ireland, and we have crisis management, which has to be fixed. And I think we're in a formative period in Europe in terms of economic policy. I think we have to have more of a regulation in the European Union, seeing to it that we have an automatic implementation of regulations preventing countries from ending up in a big deficit. Because the deficit in one country will spread to problems in a second, because the second country has to be part of lending new money. But the long-term lesson is the same: budget balance and economic freedom. And I think the Nordic countries are a showcase for economic freedom. We have had, during the past 25 years, more reforms for economic freedom in the Nordic countries than in most other European countries. And I think that is why the development in the Nordic countries has been so positive. And that is something that other countries can always look at. And I think in recent years, Sweden has continued reforming by cutting taxes. We have decreased the tax pressure as a share of GDP from 56 to 46%. So it's much more profitable to work now. It's much cheaper to hire people. We've also cut welfare spending quite a lot, so that it's a bigger benefit from going from sick leave or unemployment to work. And now we have a fast-growing employment, and it shows reforms are working. And I think Sweden shares this kind of reforms for budget balance and for economic freedom with Estonia. And I think we have been on the right track, and we continue to be. I think we have still a lot to do. We still have many reforms ahead of us, and our both countries can still improve. But we can be proud that we learned our lesson so well, and we should stick to it and continue reforming. Thank you very much, and good luck. Have a nice conference.